Hi, welcome to another episode of the Heat Check podcast. I'm John Devine. With me is Anthony Chang, as always. And I think you guys know what we need to talk about today. Yeah, we'll talk about the
Drew
starting lineup.
Smith.
Yes, Drew Smith. We're going to check on his availability. We're going to check on G League updates. We're going to see if Khalil Ware is ready to take Jimmy's position because everyone's talking about Jimmy. So, was even looking, we're filming. It is Thursday. All they had on ESPN all day was talking about either LeBron or Jimmy. So why don't we talk about Jimmy with someone who knows probably better than I do because he's around him every day. Talk to me about this update.
Yeah, so this all started Tuesday morning when Shams Charania of ESPN, the new took over for Woj a few months ago, issued a trade column. Like it published a trade column basically, putting out trade rumors from around the league, headlined with Jimmy Butler and Brandon Ingram. It was timely because trade season is about to open up in the NBA, with December 12th, free agents who signed this summer becoming eligible to be traded. So pretty much a third of the league, I think, becomes eligible to be traded on December 12th, on December 15th, sorry, on Sunday. So it's a timely drop by Shams. But basically, Shams reported in there that Heat are not open to listening to trade offers for Jimmy Butler, and also that Jimmy's agent, Bernie Lee, has indicated in league circles that Jimmy is open to trade destinations like the Houston Rockets, Dallas Mavericks, Golden State Warriors. Shams also added in there that teams have already been informed that Jimmy intends to opt out of his contract to become a free agent this summer. So that's where this all started. After that, kind of went quiet. The Heat really didn't respond to the report. Bernie Lee did not issue a statement on the report. Jimmy did not speak after Tuesday's practice. So that's where it stood. Now on Wednesday, Jimmy did speak after practice, and he basically kind of brushed it off. He didn't necessarily deny it. Brushed it off. Said, "I like being in this. I don't mind being in the center of trade rumors. It's good to be talked about. I don't think there's such a bad thing as bad publicity." We asked him if where he sees his long-term future with the Heat. He said, "Who knows?" Kind of concerning some Heat fans that he didn't say, I want to be here. I'm going to be here. And I asked him basically, does he still want to spend the rest of his career with the Heat? And he said, I don't know. And basically made a comment of, it doesn't matter what I say. There's going to be a report out there that says otherwise. So why am I going to answer that question? But he could have easily quieted the noise and said, yeah, I want to be with the Heat for the rest of my career. I don't want to be anywhere else. He did not do that. So not that he has to do that, but I thought it was notable that he didn't do that. Then a few hours later, Bernie Lee went to Twitter and basically, went on a Twitter tirade with three separate posts, ripping into Shams, saying it's all fake, it's all fabricated, stop using my name in your reports. Mickey Arison, the Heat owner, retweeted Bernie Lee's tweet. So there was some endorsement there from the Heat. And that's where we are. I guess Shams today on First Take stood by I'm trying to get the actual quote of what he said, but he basically stood by his report, saying, I 1,000% stand by my reporting. It's fully vetted, and as a professional, that's what I do. That's what I get paid to do. Report truthfully and accurately. That's what this is, period. So yeah, that's where, I honestly, I don't think a lot new has been kind of reported here. It's kind of what we kind of already knew. But it's really been an eventful 48 hours, at least as far as a soap opera standpoint.
Well, let's try this because I know, we're saying Shams is the new Woj, which is all well and good. For those who don't know, those who have been under a rock, tell me a little bit about the ascent of Shams. Because 4 or 5 years ago, what do we know? Who was Shams? And all of a sudden he went from there to the Athletic and Athletic to ESPN.
Yeah, he basically learned under Woj. He worked with Woj at Yahoo before Woj moved to ESPN. And then once Woj moved to ESPN, Shams and Woj kind of became rivals, right? They were the top two newsbreakers in the league by a good amount. So then and I think Shams stayed at Yahoo for a while. Once Woj was at ESPN, they obviously were competitors. Then Shams moved to the Athletic, like you said. They remained competitors. Then Woj steps away. Shams moves him to his spot at ESPN. Young, very, he's really worked his way up the ranks. He's worked hard to, gain all these connections, and he's probably at this point, without Woj anymore, he's the most credible news breaker in the NBA as far as like league wide. So it's not like it's just some random reporter reporting this. This is the top news guy in the league. Yeah, I think you have to take that into account. There's also a history between Bernie and Shams. In 2021, I think Shams reported that basically Jimmy and there were some tense moments between Jimmy and the Heat coaching staff. This was 3 years ago. And I think Bernie Lee on Twitter went and called him an ambulance chasing piece of blank. So there have been some there's a little bit of a history with these two. Continued on Wednesday night. So yeah, it really comes down to who you believe. I don't know what Bernie has to gain from going on Twitter. If this is true, going on Twitter and denying it that strongly. But then Shams, he stood by his reporting. So it's a really fascinating situation. And the trade deadline is February 6th, I believe. So we almost have 2 months to see how this unfolds. But yeah, it's going to be interesting.
You're going to have a lot of fun. Well, yeah. Let's break down a little bit about Jimmy's situation. So we said Jimmy has a player option for next year.
Right.
And that's of what, like
52.4 million.
52.4. Oh, sorry. For those of you who have $200,000 laying around, y'all can have that. 52.4. That means he gets to opt in for that. He's 35 years old.
Right.
Has a little bit of an injury history, but he also has the history of being playoff Jimmy. So the question is, at 35 years old, does it make sense to turn down that money and try? Do you think you're going to get more money on a longer term deal at 35? Or does it make sense to opt in? Or is he looking for security long range? I guess if you get 3 years, $145 million, that's right. Not the equivalent of $52 million a year, but you may not get as much in age 36 and age 37. What kind of game of poker are these guys playing?
Yeah, well, from Jimmy's end, he wants a max contract this summer, and a max we'll see if he gets it. But he thinks he's gonna get it. He is playing well. He's missed a few games, but if you look at the advanced metrics, he has been the Heat's best player this season.
What kind of numbers would a max contract be?
Max contract with the Heat would be 4 years, $243 million.
Okay.
So that is basically $60 million a year. Yeah.
Okay. So it would be a raise. Okay.
Would be a raise, and it'd be 4 years. That would take him. He's 35 now. I think the first year, well, obviously, if he declines the player option, it would start next year. Take him till he's like 39 with the Heat. Be making $60 million. With an outside team, it's 3 years, 171. So basically, still a raise, just 1 year shorter of a contract. So the Heat have an advantage of they can offer him the most money. The question has always been, are they going to offer it to him? At this point, it doesn't seem like it. They haven't really been, obviously they didn't offer him the extension. From what I know, I don't think they still haven't offered him the extension. That's another option here. I don't know if Jimmy would take it at this point, but the Heat have an option until June 30 to offer him a 2-year max contract extension worth $113 million, which that extension would, the first year would replace his player option year. So it would start next year. So it's a more, probably easier as far as for the Heat to do because it's not a 4-year commitment. It's a 2-year commitment. But again, if Jimmy has his eyes on that max contract and he thinks he can get it, or there has been teams through back channels saying, if he stays healthy and he plays well, we want to give him that contract, he's probably not going to take that extension. So it is a game of poker. The Heat are basically saying, okay, there are many teams with cap space out there that can afford that without our help, without a sign and trade. So you're really going to decline that player option? So yeah, it is kind of a see who blinks first.
So the two questions I have: one, if he's traded with the sign and trade, then that new team can offer the 4 years.
I don't think they can. I think that rule's changed. I have to check on that, but that used to be the case, but I don't think that's the case anymore. I think it's still you don't have that advantage even if it's a sign and trade, you don't have that advantage.
The next one is, if he is traded, do you think knowing the Heat's mindset and their DNA,
Yeah.
I don't know if, well, one, you have to take close to the same amount of salary back. But also, do you think they have a preference for young, unproven players and picks? Or are they saying, look, we still think our window's open?
I think they're gonna try to thread the needle, right? I don't think they're gonna try to trade for another 35-year-old player who wants a max contract, but I think they'll try to get a young player who can help right now, right? But I know that names like Kuminga have been put out there if it's the Warriors, but somebody like that who's young and has upside, but also is good enough to help right now. Would they be as good if they trade Jimmy for a guy like Kuminga and picks and another player? Probably not. The upside wouldn't, the actual ceiling of the team wouldn't be as good right now. But the idea would be basically if he's going to leave in the offseason, why lose him for nothing? Or even if you do a sign-in trade, what are you going to get? Like a second-round pick or something? Why lose him for just that, right? Let's cash in right now. But I think one thing we have to discuss, JD, is the Heat have never done this type of trade. They did it with Shaq. That was a little bit of a different situation. Shaq was in clear decline. He was not the same player. I mean, he definitely wasn't the best player on the team back then. I mean, Dwayne was already had established himself as the best player on the team at that point. Jimmy is still, I think a lot of people, when he's healthy and he's engaged, most people would say he's still the Heat's best player. And he hasn't created a mess. That Shaq situation, while I wasn't covering the team back then, from what I remember, it was very messy, right? And there's a chance that Jimmy could make it like that, right? There's time for that. But as of now, that's not the case. So when is the last time the Heat have basically given up on a team to trade away its best player to really kind of take a step back, right? If you're trading Jimmy, you're basically taking a step back, even if it's for the betterment, long-term benefit of the franchise. As of like in the now, which Heat are all about now, it'd be taking a step back, especially when the Heat. I mean, they won. As of now, they were recording before the game against Toronto on Thursday. They've won 3 straight. They're playing their best basketball. The East is not good. I think they're in 5th in the East, maybe 1 loss back of 4. So it hasn't been a great season, but they're right there. So that's the thing that I keep coming back to. Yes, probably long term it makes sense to trade Jimmy if you're not going to give him that contract in the summer. But the Heat have never played that game of, well, we're just going to punt because it makes sense long term. They're all about going for it now.
Yeah, I think their DNA is as such. We can do this,
We'll figure it out later. We'll figure it out later.
I think Omar likes to say for Steve Ross that they just pay the credit card bills now. You keep paying the minimum, and then when that balance comes due, that's when you pay due. Let's be honest. It's not like Mickey Arison. If he ever wants to go over that second apron and do whatever and pay that, he could. He prefers not to. Just like, we all prefer not to pay those big bills if we have to. We understand that. And you're right. The East, if you take Boston out of it, outside of that, who can you say is running away with it? The Knicks, everyone at the beginning, they anointed them darlings because, they picked up Cat, they picked up Bridges, they still had Brunson. Their records aren't that far apart. I've always been touting Orlando since the beginning of the season, but now their top 2 players are hurt long term.
Right.
And, and it takes a while to gel and get back in sync. And to be honest with you, the Heat is playing its best basketball this season. I mean, we keep waiting for Tyler Hero. Is he going to get hurt anytime soon? We keep asking. He keeps delivering. Bam's sliding out of that funk. I think the development of those 2 guys in their offensive games only helps what Jimmy can and can't do. Jimmy is a great player. He can will it, but just like most people's games, there are still things. It's not like he's going to be the best 3-point shooter. Now, if you put the ball in his hands and you're like, okay, give me something, he will give you something. But it's not like we said Tyler Hero's shooting, over 40% from 3-point land?
Yeah.
That's not going to happen. But because you have to pay attention to those other 2, it gives Jimmy more room to operate. So, these guys are better basketball minds than we are because they are sitting there and we are sitting here talking about it. Let's just be honest with you. I think there's room. We keep saying there's time. The trade window opens on the 15th for most of the league. I think you said a third of the league.
A third
be
of the league.
traded right.
It's basically most free agents who sign contracts this offseason. Not every free agent, because it just depends on the timing of the signings, but most of them become eligible to be traded the 15th. And I think that's a third of the league, I believe. So that's a lot of players. So yes, Jimmy's eligible to be traded right now. But when you think about, you need all, because of the aprons and the salary cap, system and all that, you want as many options available, right? So basically and it's early still in the season. Trade season officially opens up when all those players that date, when a third of the league usually becomes available to be dealt, because all of a sudden a lot more players are on the board and a lot more things are possible.
Right, because now, like we said, with the first and second apron, you really have to match up numbers now.
Yeah.
It's not like mythical. It's like, okay, 48, with, I don't know what the window is within, but it's a lot closer than it used to be.
Well, it's even, as the Heat, they're a first apron team. They cannot take back any more money than they send out in a trade. Not even $1, a cent. It has to be exact or less. And when you're trading with another first apron team that's under the same restriction, all of a sudden the match needs to be exact by the dollar, because both teams can't take in more money, right? So that's when you're talking about getting a third team in that maybe has more flexibility to kind of facilitate the deal and send money to make it work. But that's another complicated, like, yes, it's complex already because it is kind of like a poker game between Jimmy, the Heat, and everything, around them. But also the strict trade rules for all these teams makes it even more difficult. Like Phoenix, which was added, Shams reported on Wednesday night before Bernie went off, that Phoenix is another team on Jimmy's list. Phoenix is a second apron team. Not only can they not take back more money, but they can't even aggregate salaries in a trade. So it has to be, they can only trade one player at a time. So if they really want Jimmy, the only three players that would match, as a one, because they can't trade two to combine the salaries, are Kevin Durant, Bradley Beal, and Devin Booker. I don't think Heat are going to want Bradley Beal with his no trade clause. That was already an issue in the past, a couple years ago. I don't see the Suns trading Devin Booker for Jimmy Butler, and I don't see the Suns trading Kevin Durant for Jimmy Butler unless there's something going on that we don't know about, that Kevin Durant has privately asked to be traded. But that's the thing. Like, you can float all these teams out, but it's not that easy. There are a lot of layers to this that would make it very complicated for a trade to pull off. I'm not saying it's not going to happen. Andy Ellisberger is the best in the business when it comes to this, but it's just a very, very complex situation.
Now, we talked first and second apron. Are there any teams for people to note or look out for who can help facilitate? Teams that have money to spend.
Well, Brooklyn, right? Brooklyn has space. They have picks. Well, they don't have they have picks. And Brooklyn's a team that, if Jimmy sticks with the Heat all season, they are the team with cap space next summer. They are the team that doesn't need the Heat's help. They can sign him to that max contract just with that space, clean. I know Jimmy's had interest in the past with Brooklyn. He likes New York. Brooklyn, I think, has had some level of interest in Jimmy in the past. The question is, they just traded Mikal Bridges. They're kind of rebuilding. Are you willing to invest a max contract in 35 or, at that point, 36-year-old Jimmy Butler? That is the big question. But I would expect that to be used probably at least as leverage, right? Because they are the team with cap space. They are the team that they could say, well, Miami, if you don't want to sign up to this, Brooklyn will, and we will go to Brooklyn, right? So they are the team. They haven't been mentioned on the list of trade suitors because I don't think a trade probably is the way Jimmy gets to Brooklyn. It's probably in the offseason through free agency. But they are a team to watch. Golden State, another team that kind of makes sense for Jimmy because it's a team that, they have Draymond, they have Steph. If Steph wants to go for one more run at a championship, they could trade a couple of the young pieces, Kuminga, Andrew Wiggins. I think they have 3 tradable first-round picks to get Jimmy. That could make sense. You need a team that's not desperate, but just is willing to kind of go all in because they feel they're one player away, right? And if Steph puts pressure on them to get something done, you would think Golden State would at least try to pursue it. So they're a team that I think makes a lot of sense. But again, they're not a first apron team, but they're hard capped the first apron. So I think they can only take like $600,000 or $500,000 more back in a trade. So it's very limiting for them too. So again, just very complicated. But yeah, I would say Golden State, of all the teams that were mentioned, probably makes the most sense as far as a trade, just because of the situation.
Oh, yeah, I was thinking of like which teams could be that third team to
Third,
facilitate.
facilitate. Yeah.
Right.
There are honestly there are money. I think there are 3 or 4 teams with space. And I don't know them off the top of my head, but I think the Spurs are one, and I believe the Nets are another.
Well, that leads me to my next question: is the initial report said they'd be interested in 2 Texas teams, and I'm like,
Right.
well, okay, San Antonio, maybe San Antonio, you throw him in there with Wembanyama, you have CP3, even though he's not what he used to be, but maybe they think he can push him over. But why Houston?
Yeah. Well, Houston, he's from the Houston area. Houston is eager to compete, right? Which I think they're better than most people expect this season already. So that might kind of change their plans as far as going in all in for a guy like Jimmy Butler. They have a good young core, right? They have a good mix of veterans and a really talented young core, and it's producing. So do they need Jimmy? Do they need to cash in some of those chips to get Jimmy? I'm not sure, right? I don't know. I've heard some on around the league, like media types saying it doesn't make sense for Houston at this point. Like they're playing well without Jimmy. Why would they do that? Um, but yeah, I think that's why Houston's mentioned. They also, I do not believe they're above the first apron, so they have a little more flexibility. And they have picks. They have picks they can offer. But again, the question is for Houston is, are they ready to cash in some of those chips they've been building, right? Whether it's young players, picks, to kind of pounce on the next available superstar. Is Jimmy the guy they want? Or is, because not only are you trading for cashing in some, those chips to get Jimmy, but then you probably have to be ready to sign him to that type of contract when he's a free agent next summer, right? Or an extension. So are they willing to commit that type of money to him at this point of his career? So I think Jimmy and Houston have been linked now for a few months ever since this started this offseason. But I think because they're playing so well, that might change some things.
If you told me if this was a year or two ago when we were in this situation, I would probably scream Philadelphia, Philadelphia, Philadelphia.
Yeah.
But this year, one, they're a total mess. But two, they also picked up a PG-13.
Yeah,
so
Max.
Why put it in the same? And their salary situation is.
Yeah. Dallas is another team that was mentioned. I kind of don't see that either. They're not going to trade Kyrie or Luka for him, and I don't know if the Heat would want anybody else. So I don't think Dallas makes too much sense. I just keep coming back to Golden State. I'm not saying he's going to get traded. We can get into that of my prediction of what's going to happen in a few minutes, but I think if he is traded, Golden State just makes a lot of sense to me. But yeah, and I think if it comes down to the offseason, again, Brooklyn probably is going to be the team that's going to be again, the leverage, right? Because they are the ones with cap space.
All right. Let's get your magic 8 ball, your crystal ball
Yeah.
out. Here's what I want to do. You've got 3 options for Jimmy. Okay? That can include staying. That can include free agency at the end. That can include any one of those. What do you think are your 3 most likely scenarios you think will happen?
My most likely scenario is he stays. And in the offseason, he probably signs elsewhere.
Okay.
I think I entered the season with that prediction of I don't think they're going to make a trade because I think the trade is going to be too hard to pull off. I don't know if there's a good enough package for the Heat to make that type of move and go against what they've always stood for, right? If there was obviously a great package of 3 first-round picks, a really good young player, that's a different story. I just don't know if that's going to be there. And I think that's what it would take for the Heat to do this type of trade where they've really never done it before. So I'm going to predict he stays, but I think it'll be a very noisy 2 months leading up to the deadline. And then I think in the summer he probably goes elsewhere. That would be my most likely scenario. Second would be a trade. I just don't see him at this point because of how things have transpired. I just don't know if the Heat would offer him. I think my least likely scenario is I don't know if the Heat would offer him an extension. Right? We've already seen they were hesitant this offseason. I kind of think because of just maybe this core running its course, like to invest another 3 years in Jimmy, I don't know if they're ready to do that. So I think that's my least likely option. But I don't know if it's any if it's if Heat fans want to hear that, but at least at my number one prediction, he's going to stay, at least play out the season. I think some people might have already kind of ruled that out with all the speculation surrounding him in December.
Okay, so if let's say he's staying the season, whatever. It looks like Spo has been mixing and matching since day one to try and find the right combination that works for them. Like we said, we're filming this before Thursday night's game, but even before that, it looks like he's found some real continuity lately. With the starting lineup, what do you see from this lineup or his combinations that's making this work?
I think it's a lineup that makes sense, right? I mean, we know
the lineup again.
we know Tyler Hero, Bam, and Jimmy are the three starters, right? The three core starters. And I think with Duncan Robinson in there, obviously, the offense is just better when Duncan's on the court. That's been the case for 4 or 5 seasons now, I feel like, ever since he really has been in the rotation. His gravity, he's obviously one of the best three-point shooters in the NBA. He's become a better passer. He's become a better driver. His two-man game with Bam just opens things up for others. And then Haywood Highsmith, when you have Tyler and Duncan playing together, the defense could be an issue, even though they've improved, I think, a little bit. But Haywood helps cover up the defensive problems, right? He's a really good defender. I think he's underrated as a defender. I think he's probably a top 15 perimeter defender in the NBA. I really think that highly of him. And he can knock down an open shot too. And he's good on the baseline as far as cutting, playing off the ball. He doesn't need the ball in his hands. So think about what Duncan brings to the offense and helps balance that out. And then Haywood, what he brings to the defense helps balance that out. It's just a lineup that really makes sense around Bam, Jimmy, and Tyler. As opposed to Terry and Nico, which I know he started the season with. Terry and Nico aren't great defenders, right? And then offensively, they were having some struggles too. So I think that's why that lineup really didn't work well. This lineup, I'm trying to pull up the lineup data and it's not actually loading for me. I think there might be a bug right now on NBA.com, but as of a couple of days ago, they had the best starting lineup in the NBA, I believe. Again, it's a small sample. It's only 9 games, but just very encouraging so far what this lineup has been able to do. It seems like Eric Spoelstra has landed on something that works. Again, we'll see how it is over a 20, 30 game stretch, but through the first 9 games and then tonight's the 10th game, we'll see what happens. It's been one of the best lineups in the league.
How do you think Terry and Nico are adjusting to working with the second unit? And I always say when they say second units, that's all well and good. That doesn't last through the whole thing because after, how you start and how you end, you can still mix and match from there. It's not those 5 for 48 minutes or 40 minutes. I don't think Spo puts them on at the same time. It's not these same 5 the whole time they're on the floor.
Right. Yeah, they're staggering guys. And Terry's closed a few games ever since he moved to the bench. He's not starting, but he's closing games. So I think Terry's adjusting pretty well. It's definitely a different role for him. I think it frees him up to be more aggressive offensively because he is playing 20 minutes a game. And sometimes when he's on the court, Tyler isn't on the court or Jimmy isn't on the court. And Terry can take more shots and play a bigger role in the offense. So I think it frees him up to play more of his game and play more on the ball. And Nico, unfortunately for him, has been out of the rotation. He hasn't played in a while. And I spoke with him last week about it, and he is frustrated, right? He feels like he had what he wanted. He had a starting role, and now he's not even playing. So he's feeling like he needs to earn the trust back of the team. He knows he needs to be better. And as of right now, with the Heat playing so well, he's probably not going to be in rotation unless there's an injury or they go on this losing streak. This rotation, whether it's a starting lineup, the guys are usually off the bench with Drew Smith, Terry Rozier, Jaime Jaquez, Kevin Love, that's working. And that's what the Heat have been searching for all year, right? Consistent basketball, playing to their quote-unquote identity, and that's what they've been doing. Nico, he's gonna have to work his way back to get some minutes. It's a really interesting situation where he started the year as a starting power forward, playing 20, 25 minutes a game, and now he doesn't get into games. So it's been a tough start to the season for him.
The good thing is, when it comes to Spo, he's not going to leave any stone unturned.
No.
At some point in the year, there's going to be a shot where Nico's going to get back in for a while, and then he gets a chance to prove it, one way or the other.
Yeah, for sure. And look, even Haywood. Haywood had a few DNPs early in the season, which I was surprised about because I kind of thought he was, I don't want to say, obviously Spo knows way more basketball than I do, but I was like, why isn't this guy playing? He's your best, other than Bam, he's your best perimeter defender.
Right.
He fits with that group. And look, now he's in a starting role. And I don't know if he's going to get pulled from that starting lineup. I think he's there to stay. And I mean, that's just an example. And look, you look at Drew Smith as well. Drew Smith wasn't in the rotation. Paul Larson goes out with a sprained ankle. Drew Smith gets an opportunity, plays well. He's probably staying in that rotation for now. So if Nico kind of earns that, that trust back and plays well, strings together a few good performances when that opportunity comes, yeah, like you said, I think that he would want him to be in the rotation. He brings a skill set this team doesn't have. He's 6'10", 6'11", is skilled, really good passer, can lead plays fast, can lead a break, pushes the pace, can knock down 3-point shots, even though he struggled with that early, to start the season. He's still a good shooter. So I think that he wanted to be in the rotation. It's just right now, the results weren't great and they went elsewhere.
Well, trade talk or no trade talk, I mean, for the next few weeks, or at least until February, we have two things we're looking out for. We're going to be looking out to see how well this team plays. If this team plays well enough to even not consider it, I guess that's a possibility, looking at the weakened state of the East. And then just Jimmy in general, because like you said, we're at a deadline here for the end of this year because you're talking about either extensions, you're talking about whether he can get up and walk away for nothing, or you're talking about what's the Heat going to do? Will they change their DNA in this situation, which I think is fascinating because the Heat, if nothing else, they have a set way of how they're going to do something, and they usually stick with it. Will this be the exception to the rule?
Yeah, I think you make a good point. I think the way they play, the results of these, next 2 months could dictate what happens, right? If all of a sudden the injury bug hits, they lose, 8 out of 12 games, the conversation could be very different about the Jimmy Butler situation, right? But if they continue to play well, hover around that 4 spot in the East, 5 spot in the East, that changes things too. So I think that will determine a lot of how these next few months goes and what ultimately happens with Jimmy Butler. But what I could tell you now, just based on my reporting, is Jimmy Butler is not asked to be traded. And the Heat are not aggressively shopping him. Are they listening to offers? Probably. It makes sense, right? If somebody's indicated that they plan to opt out, whether you believe it or not, and become a free agent, and you might lose him for nothing, it would make sense that he would at least be doing their due diligence and picking up the phone, right, and seeing what's out there. Right. So that doesn't surprise me. But are the Heat aggressively trying to trade him at this point? No. And as Jimmy said, I want to be traded. I don't want to be here anymore. No. So I think whatever happens, I would be surprised if anything happens soon. Because again, it is a complex situation, and there hasn't been one side isn't like eager to get this done. Like they're kind of want to see how this goes for the next few weeks and then go from there.
Well, I look forward to seeing it. The good news is we have Anthony, who's right up there personal, and he'll be chronicling this all the way through. We're going to let Anthony get ready for tonight's game, and feel free to read about it in print, MiamiHerald.com. We have the podcast that we'll be doing each week, and we will keep you up to date as often as possible and as often it warrants. Like I said again, I'm John Devine. This is Anthony Chang. And until next time, we'll see you here on Heat Check.